Record. All right, today we have Tyler Parette. He's the new Vice President of Resident Services at Aeon. Before Aeon, he worked in Tulsa, Oklahoma as Director of Outreach and Engagement for Housing Solutions. Hey, Tyler, thanks for being here. First, can you tell me a bit about your new role?
Yeah, absolutely, JD. Thanks for having me. So the role that I'm in at Aeon, it's a role that's been at the organization for some time. But my job is really to coordinate service delivery across all of Aeon's portfolio. So Aeon has about 60 properties spread across the Twin Cities metro area. And what I do is partner with existing service providers. So those are partner agencies like Simpson, RS Eden, YMCA to deliver supportive housing services at some of our units that have dedicated supportive housing services attached to them. And then I also manage an internal team that is focused on delivering kind of light touch case management to folks that might be housing unstable in properties with specifically units dedicated to 30% AMI or 50% AMI, things like that.
Sure. When you say housing services or support services, that's things like career training and stuff like that?
Could be, yeah. A lot of what our internal team does is connecting people to services that already exist in the community. So a lot of times, depending on what specific need people have, there's a lot of services available that they might not be aware of. So one of the things that our team does is just kind of keep an internal log of what services are active, what's working well, who's active in which parts of the metro area, and then make sure to connect people to those right services that seem like a really good fit for them at the time.
Yeah. And you've been in this role for a bit now. Tell me a bit about some of your experience before this, what you were doing in Oklahoma and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So in Oklahoma, I worked for the lead agency for Tulsa's Continuum of Care. Folks that are familiar with work around homelessness know that HUD kind of organizes homeless services funding around continuums of care nationwide. In the Twin Cities metro area, those continuums of care are led by primarily county governments. In Oklahoma, it's a little bit different. Our continuum of care in Tulsa was led by a nonprofit that I worked for and helped manage all of their service delivery to unsheltered homeless populations, as well as a lot of our community engagement pieces as well, trying to involve the community at large in being part of the solution to end homelessness in Tulsa.
Sure. How would you say that experience is informing you in this new position?
Yeah, I think by and large, the populations are really similar, right? Folks that are in desperate need of affordable housing oftentimes are existing in the margins and have had experiences with homelessness or close to experiences with homelessness. So I think that when we look at programming with the margins in mind and making sure that people aren't falling through the gaps, really we're talking about that population that is at high risk for homelessness. So I think that a lot of the programming that I'm looking at bringing to our portfolio at Aeon is consistent with programming that I've been familiar with in roles in serving populations that have experienced homelessness.
Sure. Can you speak on any of that? I'm wondering if, I can't imagine it's Aeon doing the tabling out at encampments, things like that. But is it more about forming those relationships with counties or what? Yeah, can you speak on that a bit?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's about forming relationships with county governments and other agencies that are active in continuums of care and really thinking from a systems level how to remove barriers into permanent housing. I think that was something I focused a lot on in Tulsa, is how to kind of strip away some of the hurdles that are put in place for people that are out on the street trying to find an apartment or find a place to live, and really think about how to streamline that more effectively so that we're matching people with available units as quickly as possible and minimizing the amount of trauma that people experience in an experience of homelessness. Sure. Really kind of expediting that process to get a set of keys and move into a unit.
What would you say are some of those main hurdles?
Yeah, I think, one of the biggest ones that I've seen is just that systems don't always talk well with each other. I think people talk well with each other, and people are part of systems. So if you can kind of strip away some of the titles and different groups and kind of get into a room and think creatively about how to meet the need that we're all trying to see, which is, people matched to units full, people off of the street and into housing opportunities, I think then you can start to really think creatively about, which of these systems are working well and efficiently, and then where are the breakdowns in communication where the systems aren't talking well with each other, or stuff is getting lost in transition, and how do we start to solve for some of those things. So those are conversations I've already been a part of, with some continuums of care locally, as well as Minnesota Housing and others. So.
Sure. Does Aeon take people, take isn't the right word, but are there residents in Aeon facilities that come straight from unsheltered homelessness, or is there usually something in between?
Yeah, it's both and. So we have some units that are dedicated for folks that are transitioning out of long-term homelessness. Mm-hmm. But we also have market rate units, and we've got the full spectrum in between, 30% AMI, 60% AMI. So I think that really when we look at resident services from an Aeon perspective, it has to be a pretty broad net, because we're serving people that have really high needs, that are transitioning out of homelessness, and sometimes are coming with dedicated service. But we also are serving residents that are market rate units and living in great parts of town. So I think that we've got the full gambit, and we've got a design programming that fit that broad swath.
Yeah. What are some maybe initiatives or projects that you've led or been a part of during your work in Oklahoma?
Yeah. I'm thinking back now. So it's been
sure,
6 months since I've been in Minnesota. This is the coldest it's been since I've been here. So I'm not ready for the winter yet. It's going to be exciting. Yeah. So Oklahoma, the most recent initiative I was part of was with the local continuum of care. I built out kind of a dedicated street outreach program that was designed into the continuum of care to kind of really expedite the process from engagement with the local continuum of care into permanent housing. Mm-hmm. So like I said, removing a lot of the barriers that were put in place about people having to go to X agency, then go to Y agency, and then Y agency has to call X agency, and a lot of things get lost in that shuffle. So thinking about how to design those systems in a way that streamlines that process for the end user, instead of requiring the end user to juggle all of those balls themselves.
Right. Are there kind of key initiatives that you've seen that have been successful at reducing homelessness, or even just assisting people who are experiencing homelessness? Are there things that you've maybe learned that could come here that would help with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that how we think about housing in general is pretty crucial to the success of initiatives in regards to ending homelessness. There are a lot of models nationally that kind of center community as this model that is effective for people transitioning out of homelessness, or just looking for affordable housing in general. I think the phrase is simple but true. We all do better when we all do better. And when we can see that our neighbor is struggling, or when we're part of a community and we know that, like, hey, so-and-so is hitting hard times, we should, reach out and see if we can do something. That tends to be pretty effective. And when people know their neighbors, they tend to be able to ask for help, and they're not just suffering in silence. And so I think that when we look to models to effectively house individuals that are in need of affordable housing, we should look to models that kind of center that community and provide opportunities for people to get to know each other in the neighborhoods that they exist.
Yeah. And I know you're still getting a lay of the land, but are you seeing those efforts happen here? I know homelessness has been talked about a lot in the Twin Cities, probably for the last 3 years more than ever. Are you seeing these efforts or these conversations backed up by action?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, it's not a monolith. Like it happens in different pockets in different ways. So there's not this, clean prescribed program that everybody rolls out that increases, quote, community engagement. Each community is specific. There's culturally specific communities that have culturally specific models to kind of increase community involvement. And we see that at Aeon properties too, where we have different properties with different concentrations of different demographics of folks. So I think the key is focusing on those communities individually and listening to the residents in those communities about what it is that they need, what it is that they're asking for to increase community engagement, and then being able to provide that programmatically, or finding people in the community that can provide that as well.
Do you know what that looks like? Some of these maybe culturally specific efforts. I'm thinking, native homelessness becomes top of mind, and the disparities are really bad in the native community. Do you know like what things are done that would maybe be different than another community?
I don't necessarily know for the Twin Cities area. I can speak to
Sure.
examples in Tulsa that we saw
Yeah,
that were really effective.
I'd be curious. Yeah.
Yeah, so there were a couple outreach groups that were native specific,
Yeah.
and really focused on that community and built trust in a way that was difficult for other outreach teams. And so I think, the same rule applies. I think that you find folks that are trusted and responsible parties in those communities, and then equip them to advocate into those systems. And really that's what we're looking for at Aeon over the next few years, is not just how do we build out an internal team that's reflective of the population that exists in our properties, and the residents that we serve, but also how do we partner with trusted community partners that already know and have identified the needs of those communities and are trying to serve them effectively.
Sure. Do you think there's like a couple of specific things that really, how do I ask this? I mean, I hear people talk about, government housing would be the key to reducing homelessness or better mental health outreach. What are your thoughts on these very specific places where we should invest to improve this issue?
Yeah, I think this is definitely something I've given a lot of thought to, because I was part of an organization that was kind of the front end of that for a long time. That street outreach, connecting people with services, getting them keys to an apartment, moving them into housing. And I think that part is underinvested in, to be clear. We need a lot more of that, especially if you're going to decrease the amount of unsheltered homelessness in a community. You have to have those folks that are on the ground, building those relationships, building those bonds of trust to be able to move people out of an unsheltered environment into somewhere safe. But I think the other piece that gets overlooked a lot, especially in a housing first environment, which I think there's a lot of positive things we can say about housing first, but it's not housing only. It's not just keys. You have to provide opportunities for that back end support once somebody moves into that apartment. Because for better or worse, moving into a new apartment, especially transitioning into a new apartment from an experience of homelessness, is a dramatic shift and can at times be its own version of trauma, where you're being removed from a network where you felt supported. You might be being removed from a community or a neighborhood where you felt safe. And so providing opportunities, and by opportunities, I mean like funding opportunities from the state and federal level for those dedicated supports on the back end, is really important. And what's notable about Minnesota is there's programs that I've experienced here that did not exist in Oklahoma. So the Housing Supports Program, which is formerly GRH, that program just doesn't exist in Oklahoma. So I was really excited and have been excited to learn more about that and kind of how it works. But I think there's other opportunities in that space where we can provide dedicated support services to people living in apartments at 30% AMI, or especially folks transitioning out of homelessness, that really are going to increase the level of success that we see in those housing placements. A discouraging element is kind of this supplanting of funding with Medicaid reimbursement as part of housing stabilization. I think the thought there is good, but I think that doesn't make up for the fact that we really need to increase funding in that capacity.
Sure. Are there any Aeon projects that you could point to that are really maybe innovative or exemplary of this, maybe changing approaches to how we respond to homelessness?
Yeah, I think there's a couple in our pipeline. I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to talk about those yet.
That's fair.
Still walking that line carefully.
Right.
But I would be excited to talk about those maybe on a future show.
Sure. Right.
But I think, some of the partnerships that we've got right now are really effective. I'm thinking of our new property, Sound on 76th. We've got a partnership with Haven Housing, where there are a few units there that have individuals. I'm not sure if those are dedicated LTH or just 30% AMI, but there's some dedicated funding services attached to those units, and they're working really well. I think some of the other success points that I can draw from, we've kind of recently had a conversation with Minnesota Housing where we redesigned and really just kind of on our end redesigned the population that we were serving at a very specific apartment complex to really open the door for folks that were transitioning out of more intensive supportive services. And I think that's going to really change the level of success that we're seeing with folks in those placements as well. So I think, it's not so much designing a program from the outset and expecting it to be operating really effectively, but it's creating programs that can be flexible and be able to change kind of midstream to be able to accommodate what you're seeing in regards to the success of the stability of the residents. Because I think from a development perspective, you only know so much at the front end. But once you start getting residents into those apartments and seeing how successful they are, or how not successful they are, I think then that's an opportunity to redesign kind of what that mix is so that we're seeing really stable placements for residents that are transitioning out of whatever environment they're transitioning from.
Yeah. Awesome. Tyler, I don't think I have any other questions. Is there anything you want to add that I didn't ask about?
I don't think so. I think I've just been really excited to be a part of the housing community in Minnesota. It seems like a really, really great and kind of cutting edge place to be. There's a lot of things that people are trying, and it's just a really innovative space. So I'm really happy about the move and excited to continue to be a part of the community.
Awesome. Good luck with the winter. Thanks so much for joining us. Yeah.
Thanks, JD.
Take care.